In the modern workplace, we are told to be team players, to collaborate, to contribute to a culture of success. We are given performance reviews, graded on metrics, and judged by our perceived value. But what happens when an employee decides to conduct a performance review of their own? A review so brutal, so final, it is written in blood. This is the story of Arthur Finch, a quiet, meticulous man who was deemed redundant by his company. But Arthur believed the redundancy was not in his work, but in the humanity of his colleagues. He decided to correct this error. This is not just the story of a workplace massacre. This is the chilling, articulate, and terrifyingly logical testimony of the man who wielded the knife, a man who believes he was not a murderer, but a judge, a jury, and a righteous executioner. Before we open this case file and listen to Arthur's chilling account, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. You need to hear this story in his own words. Now, let us take you inside the mind of the man who turned a corporate office into a slaughterhouse, and who is about to explain, with unnerving clarity, exactly why he did it. The world of Arthur Finch, for the 15 years he worked at Veridia Solutions, was a study in beige. The fabric of his cubicle walls was beige. The corporate issue carpet, worn down in the main thoroughfares, was a slightly darker, dirtier beige. Even the coffee, brewed in a perpetually stained pot in the break room, had a weak, beige flavor. Arthur, in his sensible slacks and rotation of 5 identical blue button-down shirts, blended into this landscape with a practiced, almost religious invisibility. At 42, Arthur was a man of meticulous habits and quiet, fierce pride. He was a data analyst, but that title was a bland, corporate simplification of his true role. Arthur was the foundation of the 14th floor. He was the man who built the elegant, complex algorithms that turned mountains of chaotic market data into clean, actionable insights. His work was the bedrock upon which the flashy marketing campaigns and charismatic sales pitches of his colleagues were built. He was the ghost in the machine, the invisible architect of Veridia's success, and for a long time that was enough for him. He didn't crave the spotlight. He craved the quiet satisfaction of a perfectly executed line of code, the elegant symmetry of a flawless predictive model. The 14th floor was an ecosystem of personalities, he observed with the detached curiosity of a naturalist. There was his boss, David Sterling, the senior vice president of strategy. Sterling was a man of impeccable suits, blindingly white teeth, and a charisma so potent it felt like a physical force. He didn't understand the technical nuances of Arthur's work, but he was a genius at presenting it. He would take Arthur's dense, complex reports and, in high-stakes meetings with clients, distill them into a few brilliant, easily digestible PowerPoint slides, his voice booming with a confidence that suggested the insights had sprung fully formed from his own magnificent brain. Then there was Mark Chun, a junior analyst a decade younger than Arthur. Mark was everything Arthur was not. Slick, socially adept, a master of the corporate Slack channel. His conversations a seamless blend of feigned enthusiasm and strategic networking. He produced work that was, in Arthur's expert opinion, sloppy and superficial, full of flashy graphs that concealed a shallow understanding of the data. But Mark was a team player. He organized after-work drinks, remembered everyone's birthday, and had an almost supernatural ability to be present whenever a senior executive was walking the floor. And finally, there was Jessica Wells from Human Resources. She was the smiling, relentlessly positive face of the corporation's soul. She spoke a fluent, impenetrable dialect of HR jargon, a language of synergy, culture fit, and managing perceptions. She was the keeper of the corporate scripture, the woman who could make a layoff sound like a spiritual journey of self-discovery. Arthur's relationship with these 3 people was the central axis of his professional life. He provided the substance for Sterling, endured the superficiality of Chun, and avoided the platitudes of Wells. For years, the system worked. It was not a just system, but it was a stable one. The instability began with a project codenamed Odyssey. It was the biggest and most important initiative in Veridia's history, a massive multimillion-dollar push into a new market. The entire success of the project hinged on the data, on correctly predicting consumer behavior in a volatile new sector. It required a level of analytical sophistication far beyond anything the company had ever attempted. Sterling had promised the board a revolutionary new predictive model, and it was Arthur, of course, who was tasked with building it. For 6 months, Arthur lived and breathed Odyssey. He worked 18-hour days, his beige cubicle littered with discarded coffee cups and printouts of complex datasets. He didn't just build a model, he created a work of art. It was an algorithm of such elegance and predictive power that it was almost prescient. It was the culmination of his life's work, a perfect, intricate machine that he had built from nothing. He would often stay late, long after the floor had emptied, just to admire its silent, logical beauty running on his monitor. Throughout the process, he had weekly check-ins with Sterling. Arthur would patiently walk him through the progress, simplifying the complex mathematics into concepts Sterling could grasp. Sterling would nod, his eyes gleaming, not with understanding, but with a hungry, predatory recognition of the power Arthur was handing him. "Brilliant, Finch, simply brilliant," he would say, clapping Arthur on the shoulder. "Keep up the good work." Mark Chun was also assigned to the Odyssey team, his role ostensibly to support Arthur. In practice, this meant he would occasionally swing by Arthur's cubicle, peer at the screen with a look of feigned comprehension, and say things like, "Wow, that's some next-level stuff, man. Let me know if you need me to grab you a coffee." He would then spend the rest of the day talking up his deep involvement in the Odyssey project at the water cooler. The day Arthur finished the model, he felt a profound, quiet sense of triumph. He had done it. He had created something truly exceptional. He sent the final, perfected code to Sterling with a brief, understated email. "Project Odyssey predictive model is complete and fully functional." The next morning, Sterling called a code red meeting with the entire executive team. Arthur was not invited. He found out later that Sterling had presented the Odyssey model as a singular, heroic creation of his own strategic genius. He had used a few of the simplified diagrams Arthur had made for him and had spoken in broad, confident strokes about harnessing the power of predictive synergy. He never once mentioned Arthur's name. The executives were blown away. The project was given a green light for a full-scale launch. The 14th floor was buzzing with the news. People stopped by Sterling's corner office to congratulate him. Mark Chun walked around with a proprietary air, accepting praise for his key role on the team. Arthur sat in his cubicle, the architect of the victory, and received nothing. He was invisible. The resentment, which had always been a low, background hum in his life, began to sharpen, to take on a new, acidic edge. It wasn't about the lack of praise. It was about the injustice. It was about the fundamental unfairness of a system that rewarded the performers and ignored the creators. The final, definitive betrayal came a month later. An email landed in his inbox from Jessica Wells, announcing a new promotion. A new position, Director of Analytical Strategy, had been created to oversee the ongoing implementation of the Odyssey model. The position, the email announced with a flurry of congratulatory emojis, had been awarded to Mark Chun. Arthur stared at the email, the words blurring on the screen. Mark Chun, the coffee fetcher, the master of superficiality. He was now the director of the world Arthur had built. It was a cosmic, institutional joke. It was a perversion of the natural order of things. In that moment, sitting in the quiet, beige hum of his cubicle, Arthur Finch felt something inside him, a fundamental gear in the machinery of his own mind, crack. The world was not just unjust. It was broken. And a broken machine, Arthur knew with a sudden, chilling clarity, needed to be fixed, or taken apart, piece by piece. The promotion of Mark Chun was not a singular event for Arthur. It was a verdict. It was the system rendering its final judgment, declaring in the clearest possible terms that his 15 years of quiet, meticulous competence were worthless. The substance he provided was merely a raw material to be processed and packaged by men like Sterling and Chun. He was a quarry, and they were the sculptors who took credit for the statue. The realization settled into his bones with the cold, heavy weight of a terminal diagnosis. His first and last attempt to fight the system was to follow the proper channels. He scheduled a meeting with Jessica Wells in Human Resources. He spent a week preparing for it, meticulously documenting his work on the Odyssey project, compiling emails, and creating a timeline that demonstrated with irrefutable data-driven logic that he was the sole architect of the model. He walked into her office, a sterile white space decorated with inspirational posters about teamwork and integrity, armed with a dossier of facts. Jessica listened with a practiced, sympathetic smile, her head tilted at the perfect angle of concerned engagement. She let him speak for 15 minutes, her eyes never leaving his face. When he was finished, she placed her folded hands on her desk. "Arthur," she began, her voice a soothing, professional balm, "I hear your frustration, I truly do, and we value your contributions to the Odyssey project deeply." It was the corporate but that he knew was coming. "But," she continued, "a leadership role like the Director of Analytical Strategy isn't just about technical skill. It's about communication. It's about synergy. It's about being a visible and collaborative part of the team. Mark has demonstrated exceptional skills in those areas. He's a real culture champion." "He doesn't understand the model," Arthur said, his voice flat, trying to keep the tremor of rage out of it. "He can't maintain it. He can't improve it. He doesn't have the skills." "That's where perception comes in, Arthur," Jessica said, leaning forward as if sharing a profound secret. "It's not just about what you do. It's about how the team perceives what you do. Your focus is, and we admire this intensely, on the work itself. But Mark's focus is on the team. And at Viridia, we are, first and foremost, a team." The conversation was a masterclass in gaslighting. His concrete, factual evidence of his work was dismissed in favor of the vague, subjective metric of culture fit. His competence was reframed as a social deficiency. He was being told, in the kindest, most patronizing way possible, that he was the problem. He had been so focused on building the engine that he had forgotten to attend the parties celebrating the car. He left her office in a daze, the folder of his meticulously prepared evidence feeling heavy and useless in his hands. He had presented a logical proof, and the system had responded with an illogical, circular argument. It was then he realized the system wasn't broken. It was designed this way. It was a machine built to protect and promote its own kind, the charismatic, the superficial, the well-liked. He was not a component of that machine. He was an anomaly, a foreign body that it was now trying to reject. The weeks that followed were a slow, quiet unraveling. The beige walls of his cubicle, once a neutral backdrop to his work, now felt like the walls of a prison cell. He would see Mark Chun striding through the office, his new title lending him an unearned aura of authority, leading meetings about the model Arthur had built, using slides with bullet points that Arthur knew he didn't understand. He would see Sterling laughing with executives, accepting praise for the project's early successes, and Arthur would sit and watch, his invisibility now a source of burning, corrosive humiliation. His work, the one thing that had given him a sense of identity and purpose, became meaningless. He was now expected to report to Mark, to provide him with updates and support him in his new role. The requests for help were a constant, galling reminder of his demotion. Mark would come to his cubicle, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper, and ask Arthur to just take a quick look at a problem he couldn't solve, to dumb it down for him. Arthur would comply, his fingers moving over the keyboard with a cold, mechanical precision, fixing the problems, his resentment building with every keystroke. His life outside the office began to fray. He stopped calling his sister his only living relative. He stopped going to the gym. His neat, orderly apartment grew cluttered. He started drinking, not for pleasure, but as a nightly anesthetic, a way to silence the furious, looping monologue of injustice in his head. His obsession with his colleagues took on a darker, more voyeuristic quality. He began to follow them online, a silent, digital ghost haunting their curated lives. He would scroll through David Sterling's Instagram feed, a nauseating tableau of expensive vacations, charity galas, and saccharine posts about his amazing team. He would read Mark Chen's smug updates on LinkedIn, where he chronicled his exciting journey as Viridia's newest director. He would see their smiling faces, their perfect families, their triumphant hashtags, and he would feel a hatred so pure and so intense it was almost clarifying. They were not just his professional rivals. They were a different species, a species of parasite that thrived by feeding on the work of others. The final, inevitable act came 3 months after Mark's promotion. Arthur was summoned to another meeting with Jessica Wells. This time, David Sterling was there as well, his expression one of grave, feigned solemnity. "Arthur, this is difficult," Sterling began, a line he had no doubt rehearsed. "As you know, the company is undergoing some strategic realignment. We've had to make some tough decisions about resources." It was the standard corporate execution script. Jessica took over, her voice dripping with a false empathy that made Arthur's skin crawl. She spoke of redundancies, of shifting priorities, of his role being eliminated. She told him it wasn't a reflection of his work, which had always been solid, but a necessary business decision. They were offering him a standard severance package. His last day would be today. He would be escorted from the building by security. Arthur said nothing. He simply sat and looked at them, at Sterling's handsome, lying face, at Jessica's perfectly composed mask of professional sympathy. He felt no shock, no surprise, only a strange, profound sense of calm. The machine had finally, officially rejected him. The foreign body was being expelled. He was being erased. As the security guard, a large, impassive man, escorted him to his cubicle to pack his personal effects into a small cardboard box, he passed Mark Chun in the hallway. Mark saw the box, the guard, and his face flickered with a brief, triumphant smirk before being replaced by a look of concerned surprise. "Oh man, Arthur," he said, his voice oozing with fake sincerity. "I'm so sorry. If there's anything I can do." Arthur just looked at him, his own face a blank canvas. He said nothing. He put his one personal item, a small, framed photo of his late parents, into the box and allowed himself to be led to the elevator. As the doors slid shut, sealing him off from the beige world of the 14th floor for the last time, he was not thinking about his lost job or his uncertain future. He was thinking about the fundamental injustice of it all. He had been judged, weighed, and found wanting, not by the quality of his work, but by a corrupt, broken system. And as the elevator descended, a new, cold, and terrifyingly logical thought began to form in his mind. The system had conducted its performance review of him. Perhaps it was time for him to conduct a performance review of the system. A final, definitive review. The first month of Arthur Finch's unemployment was a period of profound and disorienting silence. The relentless, humming rhythm of corporate life, which had structured his days for 15 years, was gone. It was replaced by a vast, empty expanse of time. The cardboard box of his personal effects sat on his living room floor, a sad, beige monument to a life that had been summarily deleted. For the first few weeks, he did nothing. He slept late, watched daytime television, and drank. The severance money from Viridia was a final, bitter irony the company was paying for his slow, quiet dissolution. But Arthur was not a man built for dissolution. His mind, deprived of the complex data sets and logical problems it was designed to solve, began to turn its formidable analytical powers inward, focusing on a single all-consuming problem: the injustice he had suffered. He did not see his firing as a personal failure. He saw it as a systemic one. He was not a victim. He was a data point, an anomaly that exposed the deep structural flaws in the Viridia machine. The quiet of his apartment became the laboratory for his obsession. He stopped drinking. He cleaned his apartment with a renewed, ferocious energy, imposing a stark, minimalist order on his surroundings. He set up a large whiteboard in his living room, the kind used for corporate brainstorming sessions. But instead of flowcharts about market synergy, Arthur began to construct a different kind of diagram. It was a detailed, intricate blueprint of his own destruction. At the center, he wrote Viridia Solutions. Branching off from it, he wrote the three names: David Sterling, Mark Chun, and Jessica Wells. Under each name, he began to list their transgressions, his handwriting small, neat, and precise. Under Sterling, intellectual theft, fraudulent representation, credit usurpation. Under Chun, superficiality as virtue, social manipulation, unearned advancement. Under Wells, institutional gaslighting, complicity in deception, weaponization of corporate policy. He treated his own downfall as a dataset to be analyzed. He went through his old emails, his performance reviews, his notes on the Odyssey project. He was building a case, a prosecutor preparing for the trial of the century. He began to write. He filled notebooks with a dense, sprawling manifesto, a document that was part personal memoir, part philosophical treatise, part blistering indictment of the modern corporate world. He called it the Final Performance Review. In it, he laid out his belief that companies like Viridia were no longer productive enterprises. They were social hierarchies that had decoupled success from competence. They had created a new aristocracy of the charismatic, and he, Arthur, was a member of a new, invisible peasant class. As he wrote, his sense of personal grievance began to transform into a cold, righteous sense of purpose. He was no longer just a wronged man. He was a revolutionary, a reformer. He was going to expose the rot at the heart of the system. But an exposé, a manifesto, was not enough. Words were the tools of the system he despised, the meaningless jargon of Jessica Wells. His statement had to be something more. It had to be a physical, irrefutable act. It had to be a demonstration. He began to plan his demonstration with the same meticulous, data-driven precision he had once applied to his work. The target was obvious. The 14th floor of the Viridia Solutions building. It was the scene of the crime, the heart of the corrupt system. The timing, too, had to be symbolic. He chose the date of the one-year anniversary of the successful launch of the Odyssey project, a day he knew the company would be celebrating, a day they would be celebrating the triumph he had authored. His days took on a new, grim routine. In the mornings, he would write his manifesto. In the afternoons, he would conduct reconnaissance. He knew the Viridia building's security protocols intimately. He knew the delivery schedules, the security guard shift changes, the blind spots in the CCTV coverage in the parking garage. He was a ghost in their system, and he would use his invisibility to his advantage. He began a rigorous physical training regimen. He ran for miles every day, his body growing lean and hard. He took a course in Krav Maga, the Israeli self-defense system known for its brutal, efficient practicality. He was not preparing for a fight. He was preparing for a task, honing his body into a tool as sharp and efficient as his mind. The final, most terrible ingredient in his plan was the weapon. He considered a gun, but dismissed it as too impersonal, too loud, too common. A gun was the tool of a madman, a rampage killer. He was not a madman. He was, in his own mind, a surgeon, and he needed a surgeon's tool. His act had to be precise, intimate, and deliberate. He chose a knife. He didn't buy a weapon from a dark alley or a pawn shop. He walked into a high-end culinary store, the kind that sold professional-grade equipment to chefs. He spent an hour talking to the clerk, discussing the merits of different types of steel, the balance of the blades, the ergonomics of the handles. He purchased a set of 3 German-made chef's knives, renowned for their sharpness and durability. They came in a black, leather-bound case. He paid with cash. The purchase was a cold, rational consumer decision. He was simply acquiring the best possible tools for the job. Back in his apartment, he would practice. He set up mannequins, the kind used for displaying clothes, and marked them with the names of his targets. He would move through the choreographed steps of his plan, his movements fluid, silent, and economical. He practiced the strikes, the angles, the points of maximum efficiency. There was no rage in his practice, no emotion at all. It was a cold, dispassionate rehearsal, like an actor memorizing his lines, or a programmer debugging a line of code. His manifesto grew, becoming a detailed justification for the act he was about to commit. He saw his planned attack not as murder, but as a form of corporate restructuring. He was going to liquidate the company's most toxic assets. He was not destroying life. He was erasing a series of failed, corrupt data points. He was correcting a fundamental error in the system. On the eve of the anniversary of the Odyssey launch, he finished his work. His manifesto was complete, a 100-page document, neatly typed and bound. His body was honed, his mind was clear, and his plan was flawless. In the black leather case on his coffee table, his 3 knives lay nested in their velvet slots, their edges sharpened to a razor's gleam. He looked around his neat, orderly apartment, at the stark white whiteboard with its diagram of injustice, and felt a profound sense of peace. The chaos of his unraveling was over. He had found a new, terrible kind of order. Tomorrow he would cease to be Arthur Finch, the Invisible Man. He would become a catalyst, a historical agent. Tomorrow he would conduct his final performance review. The morning of the Odyssey anniversary was bright, clear, and cold. Arthur Finch woke before dawn, as he always had. He did not feel nervous or agitated. He felt a serene, almost transcendent calm, the calm of an engineer on the morning of a major project launch, confident that every calculation was correct, every variable accounted for. He showered and dressed, not in one of his old, beige-blending work shirts, but in a simple, dark gray tracksuit, functional and anonymous. He ate a spare breakfast of toast and black coffee. He then sat at his desk and reread his manifesto, the final performance review, one last time, making a few minor edits to the punctuation. He placed the bound document into a slim briefcase, along with the black leather case containing his 3 perfectly sharpened knives. He left his apartment at 8:15 a.m., timing his arrival at the Viridia building to coincide with the mid-morning lull, after the initial rush of employees but before the lunch hour traffic. He drove his nondescript sedan, obeyed all the traffic laws, and parked in the visitors section of the underground garage, a level he knew had a faulty security camera in the far corner. He did not take the main elevators. He took the fire stairs, his footsteps echoing in the concrete well. He was not winded when he reached the 14th floor. His training had been effective. He emerged into a service corridor behind the break room, a corridor he knew was a blind spot. The familiar, beige world of Viridia Solutions opened up before him. The air was filled with a festive energy. Someone had brought in donuts. A banner hanging over the main bullpen read, "Happy Odyssey Day, 1 year of success." It was even more perfect than he had imagined. He walked through the office with a calm, purposeful stride. A few of his former colleagues glanced up, their faces showing a flicker of surprised recognition, but no one challenged him. He was Arthur Finch, the quiet, harmless ghost. He had always been invisible here. He used that invisibility one last time. His first target was Jessica Wells. He found her in her glass-walled office on the phone, her face arranged in its usual mask of professional empathy. He entered her office and quietly closed the door behind him. She looked up, her expression shifting from surprise to a faint, HR-trained annoyance at the interruption. "Arthur," she said, her voice cool, holding a hand up to pause her phone call. "You're not supposed to be here. I'm going to have to call security." "There's no need," Arthur said, his voice quiet and even. He placed his briefcase on her desk and opened it. He took out his manifesto. "I'm here to conduct a performance review." He then took out the first of the knives, a long, slender fillet knife. Jessica's face, for the first time since he had known her, lost its composure. The mask of corporate calm dissolved into a slack-jawed, primal fear. She opened her mouth to scream, but the sound was a choked, strangled gasp. Arthur was on her before she could make another sound. His movements were quick, efficient, and brutal, exactly as he had practiced. It was a cold, silent, and terrifyingly swift act of violence. He left her there, behind her desk, under the inspirational poster that read, "Integrity." His second target was Mark Chun. He found him in his new corner office, the one that should have been his feet up on the desk, laughing into his headset. The banner celebrating the Odyssey project was visible through his window. Arthur entered, closing the door. Mark looked up, his initial, annoyed expression turning to one of wary confusion when he saw the look in Arthur's eyes. "Finch? What the hell are you doing here? Your one-year review, Director Chun, Arthur said, his voice flat. He took out the second knife, a heavier, broader chef's knife. Mark's chair crashed to the floor as he scrambled backward, his face a mask of panicked disbelief. He was a creature of words and social maneuvering, completely unprepared for the raw, physical reality of the man who now stood before him. The violence was quick, a series of precise, economical movements. Arthur left him on the floor, surrounded by the trappings of a success he had not earned. By now, the silence on the 14th floor had been broken. A scream had come from a coworker who had peered into Jessica's office. The festive atmosphere had shattered, replaced by a wave of rising panic. People were shouting, running, the sounds of chaos echoing through the cubicle farm. Arthur walked through the pandemonium, untouched, a calm, still point in the swirling chaos. He was heading for his final target, David Sterling. He found him not in his office, but in the large executive boardroom, where he had been about to give a celebratory speech to his team. When Arthur entered, Sterling was standing at the head of the long table, a champagne flute in his hand. The handful of terrified employees who had been with him scattered, screaming, leaving the two men alone. Sterling stared at Arthur, his handsome face pale with a mixture of fear and arrogant disbelief. "Finch, have you lost your mind?" he demanded, his voice a pathetic, quavering imitation of its usual booming authority. "On the contrary, David," Arthur said, his voice calm, "I have never been more sane." He opened his briefcase and took out the third and final knife, a heavy, cleaver-like butcher's knife. "I am here to discuss your performance. Specifically, your tendency to present the work of others as your own." For a moment, Sterling's terror was replaced by a flash of his old, narcissistic rage. "You were nothing," he spat. "You were a drone. I gave your work a voice. I made it important." "You were a parasite," Arthur replied, his voice devoid of any emotion. "And today, your parasitic relationship with this company is being terminated." He moved towards Sterling, who, in a final, pathetic act of defiance, threw the champagne flute at him. It shattered harmlessly against Arthur's chest. The final act of violence was the most brutal, a grim and bloody conclusion to their long, toxic relationship. When it was over, Arthur stood for a moment in the silent, blood-spattered boardroom. The sounds from outside were a cacophony of sirens, a sign that the world was finally responding. He was not frantic. He did not try to escape. His work was done. He calmly walked to the head of the boardroom table, to the seat that had always been Sterling's. He placed his manifesto in the center of the table. He took the 3 bloody knives and arranged them neatly on top of the document, like a set of grotesque paperweights. Then he sat down in Sterling's chair, folded his hands on the table, and waited for the police to arrive. His final performance review was complete. The SWAT team found Arthur Finch exactly as he had left himself. Sitting calmly at the head of the boardroom table, a placid, almost beatific expression on his face. The scene around him was one of unimaginable carnage, a stark, brutal contrast to his serene composure. He did not resist. He surrendered without a word, his movements slow and deliberate, his compliance absolute. The hours that followed were a blur of official procedure. He was processed, photographed, and placed in a small, windowless interrogation room. He remained silent, not a defiant, angry silence, but a patient, waiting one. He had one final act to perform, and he would do it on his own terms. His audience was Detective Katrine Harding, a sharp, experienced homicide investigator with weary, intelligent eyes that had seen every imaginable shade of human depravity. She entered the room not with aggression, but with a quiet, professional calm that mirrored his own. She sat opposite him, opened a file, but did not look at it. She just looked at him. "Arthur Finch," she said, her voice a low, even rasp, "you have been read your rights. You have waived your right to an attorney. Do you want to tell me what happened today on the 14th floor of the Viridia Solutions building?" Arthur looked at her, his gaze steady and direct. "I would be happy to," he said, his voice clear and articulate. but I would prefer to read my prepared statement. It is a comprehensive analysis of the events and their underlying causes. You'll find it is more efficient than a standard Q&A. He was referring to his manifesto, the final performance review, which had been carefully bagged as the prime piece of evidence from the crime scene. Harding had already read its first few pages. She had been a cop for 20 years, and she had never read anything quite like it. It was not the rambling, incoherent screed of a madman. It was a cold, precise, and terrifyingly logical indictment. "All right, Arthur," she said, nodding to another officer. "Let's get you your statement." They brought the document into the room. Arthur put on a pair of reading glasses, opened the binder, and began to read. For the next 3 hours, with only a few breaks for water, Arthur Finch delivered his chilling testimony. He did not confess to a crime. He presented a thesis. He read in a calm, even monotone, the voice of a university professor delivering a lecture. He detailed, with excruciating precision, the corporate culture of Viridia Solutions. He explained the intellectual theft of the Odyssey project, the systemic rewarding of superficiality, the institutional gaslighting he had endured. He spoke of Sterling, Chun, and Wells not as human beings, but as symbols, as toxic assets and failed systems. "The modern corporation," he read, his eyes fixed on the page, "has created a new form of violence. It is a quiet, administrative violence. It is the violence of the deleted email, the disingenuous performance review, the strategic redundancy. It is the slow, systematic murder of a person's spirit, their competence, their very identity. And the perpetrators of this violence are celebrated as leaders, as innovators, as culture champions." Harding listened, her professional composure a mask for the deep, unsettling chill that was creeping down her spine. He was not confessing to a loss of control. He was claiming to have been an agent of a higher form of control. He was not insane. He was operating from a place of absolute, unshakable, and terrifyingly rational conviction. "My actions today," he continued, turning a page, "were not a rampage. That word is an emotional, imprecise term used to describe chaos. My actions were not chaotic. They were a meticulously planned, data-driven, and necessary course of corrective action. I was not a killer. I was a consultant, brought in to perform a final, definitive, and much-needed corporate restructuring." He showed no remorse. He expressed no emotion at all, except a faint, intellectual pride in the logic of his argument. He spoke of the murders of his 3 colleagues with the same dispassionate, clinical detachment he would have used to describe the deletion of a corrupted line of code. David Sterling's primary function was to act as a charismatic interface for the intellectual property of others, he read. His performance was fraudulent. Termination was the only logical outcome. Mark Chun was an example of a system that promotes social skills over substantive competence. He was a bug in the system, a superficiality that threatened the integrity of the entire enterprise. His role was eliminated. Jessica Wells was the embodiment of the system's immune response, an HR apparatus designed not to protect employees, but to protect the corrupt hierarchy from legitimate grievances. She was, in essence, a firewall that needed to be decommissioned. When he finished, he closed the binder and neatly squared its edges. He took off his reading glasses and folded them. He looked at Detective Harding. "Are there any questions?" he asked, as if he had just concluded a business presentation. Harding was silent for a long moment. She had been trained to find the cracks in a suspect's story, the flicker of emotion, the hint of a lie. But Arthur Finch presented a solid, seamless wall of cold, hard logic. He had built a new reality for himself, a reality in which he was not a monster, but a reformer, a martyr to the cause of competence. And in that reality, his actions were not just justified. They were necessary. "No, Arthur," she finally said, her voice a low, weary whisper. "I don't have any questions." The trial of Arthur Finch was a short one. He pleaded no contest. His manifesto, his chilling testimony, was his only defense, and it was the most damning evidence against him. He was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in a maximum security psychiatric facility, Not because he was deemed legally insane. His planning had been too meticulous for that, but because no ordinary prison seemed equipped to contain the unique, cold, and articulate nature of his evil. He resides there to this day, a quiet model inmate. He spends his days in the prison library, reading books on philosophy and system theory. He is, by all accounts, polite, intelligent, and cooperative. He has never expressed a single moment of remorse. In his own meticulously ordered mind, he has nothing to be sorry for. He simply conducted a performance review, found his colleagues wanting, and terminated their employment. Permanently.